Good afternoon, everybody. Here to give you my Master's Defenses portfolio. I just want to start off talking a little bit about kind of why I became a teacher and how my stuff has changed. This is just my introduction. Little thing about my philosophy here real quick in education. This is from way back last spring, but preparing students to be active citizens through dialogues and critical thinking. Working with becoming a teacher. I decided to become a teacher when I was a junior in high school. I wrote this paper about how the education system is horrible and all this stuff. I didn't put it up here because I thought it might offend some people. It's very right-wing inspired, which, anyway, so I made that decision then, and from then until now, my kind of views on education and everything has changed quite a bit. My educational biography detailed a lot of that. I'm not going to go into it, it's a bunch of text, nothing real interesting. But just a couple of main ideas, kind of your view of history changes when you're in a college environment where you get to see that it's not just a bunch of stuff that we know happened. There's a lot of ambiguity in there and a lot more critical thinking process in there. The same with education and how it works and a lot of the nuances of how students learn a lot more about that over the years, both in my two classes with you all and the other classes as well. So I'll go to, I'm standing task. Talk about prior knowledge real quick. That's just one particular area where my knowledge of student growth developed over the years. Started off kind of in Ed Psych and a lot of the other classes I took, learning about how students need scaffolding, learning about how learning occurs, how it's an active process rather than a passive sharing of knowledge. Then that really came more practical with my prior knowledge interviewing paper, where you take the things that you see in reading the textbooks and you see how they actually work with real students. So that really helped me develop. That helped me see kind of the major things I took away from that was that students don't have a lot of prior knowledge, and the real interesting thing was that they tend to view what you show them kind of in the light of what they've already seen. I was working with middle schoolers. You'd only take an American history course, so I showed them a bunch of world history pictures, and they put them into these time frames of American history that they'd studied. So this became really interesting, and prior knowledge became a big part of my teaching, and always trying to start a unit by fleshing that out. Just a quick example of what I did with that. This is a Constitution prior knowledge thing, just a chart. I did some simple things like this. Later on, I do some more advanced things like working with, for example, a YouTube video for a nationalism unit that actually came out of the midterm thing. Me and Dr. just talked about that. And also using different things like different kinds of pop culture references as well. For instance, for imperialism, I talked about the movie Avatar. Just finding different ways of figuring out what students know, what misconceptions they have, to kind of show them the knowledge that they already have in a lot of places they might not realize they had. Okay, so that's kind of learning about student growth and how that's kind of evolved for me. Next thing I want to talk about for a few minutes is lesson planning. I think that's another area where I've definitely grown throughout the years. When Jeremy did his presentation yesterday, I'm kind of doing a similar thing, so I saw that, and it really kind of interested me, because I saw kind of similar growth in myself. I remember when I first came in the first day of methods, you'd ask for lesson plans, and also we had the artifacts activity. I brought in something that kind of, it's a little bit of both, because it was this really simple lesson that I'd done for church. It wasn't basically just a list of Bible verses we were going to talk about. And this one had a student that kind of started writing on, kind of showed just how engaged they were in that. Not at all, because it wasn't very well put together. This is just an example. You know, really simple stuff. Not a whole lot of objectives there, not a whole lot of organization of how things are going to happen. And here's kind of how I've grown. This is my fall midterm things. They're going to pop up. Yeah, here we see I have a rationale, standards, objectives, which are the big thing, and also an explanation of how it's going to happen. So there's a lot more layers there that then help me have better quality stuff. Dylan, are you?
I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry, you're stretching. Okay, and then there were a lot of changes after that too, because I can show you what that one. That was a very simplistic lesson. It was one where that was actually when me and Dave worked together, where we basically just said, Okay, we want to talk about religion, so we're just going to go up here, and me and Dave are both good with classroom interactions, so we're just going to go up there and we're going to talk about it. We're just going to assume we're going to hit the right stuff, and it'll all go well. Technically, it all did go well, but we talked about a lot of potentials in our tuning where it could have gone wrong. I think here's the redo. We had a lot of stuff that I think made it a lot more easier for students to follow, and a lot easier for us to not get confused and kind of lose our places when things go wrong. We did a whole frame thing, so it got to be a lot more fleshed out, a lot easier for students and us to follow. And finally, continue to grow in the spring. Here, we added the whole layer of the unit, so we kind of went into even more depth with it. It's not just showing the lesson plan, but to explain how that goes along with the entire unit. And even from this, it's pretty basic. This is the one I taught in the spring involving nationalism. What is nationalism? I grew some from this as well. Here I started out with, I just do a thing that's just students writing down what they knew about nationalist movements. Not really all that engaging of a starter. Not something that's really going to get students interested in what you're talking about. Let me see what I have here to go along with that. I'm going to try to give you the video of the lesson. I didn't have the last thing for that, but I also continued to work after that, like I talked about before with the prior knowledge, working in videos, make it more engaging. So just continuing to grow throughout my lesson planning process. I think that's one place where I've really grown in just the ways that I plan out my lessons. Okay. A couple other ways that I've grown or kind of revised things. I want to take you, if I can remember which places I did this at, to my little content enhancement thing that I do, because I thought I grew in some interesting ways in how I use those. That was something I was not really proud of. It's either here or four. Sorry. All these kind of run together because they kind of overlap so much what they talk about. Here's kind of what I do with my different framing routines. First off, this is kind of what I took from my spring midterm lesson and adapted. I kind of adapted it in kind of my own ways by start to see stuff here because the students wrote in very light colors, but saving time, which was a big issue in when I taught this to the cohort in the spring, by getting rid of keywords because it was kind of an overlap with something we'd already done, and just kind of finding a way to adapt that. Here I did a pretty traditional lecture frame that went along with the PowerPoint style. It's another pretty traditional use of this routine. And as you can see, the students kind of lost interest towards the end of this about filling out the entire thing. I started to get a little bit more creative. For instance, I had originally envisioned doing this poster project and having a frame as a backup, but then I decided I don't have the time or the money to go out and buy a poster paper. So I wound up doing a frame that's kind of group share thing where, okay, one group will find this guy, one group will find this guy. Share with each other what you know, so that you aren't looking at it at all, but you're still actively engaged in looking up the information, so that it's not really passive like lecture. I thought it was a nice idea, but it didn't go very well at the time because students wouldn't listen to what other students had to say, and a lot of the groups were reluctant to share what they had to say. And later on, the African one. The African one, I did the same thing, but it was a little different because instead of having students write instead of having students to share orally what they had found, I had them write on the smartboard. I might go to the technology thing in a second so you can actually see where the students wrote on. That I found worked a whole lot better because students who wouldn't listen to what their peers had to say would actually sit and write down whatever their peers wrote down. Because it's one of those student instincts that if something's getting written on the board, I need to copy it down. Kind of an area where students are more tuned to the visual than the auditory. So that was just another example of how I kind of took things that I learned and kind of made it my own, and how they kind of transformed throughout the course of the lesson. That's a few kind of nuts and bolts strategy, lesson planning, sword deals.